Ethan groaned as his ship rattled and shuddered violently. The dashboard lights blinked like a cosmic disco, and the alarm blared, adding insult to injury. "Reliable, my ass," he muttered, slamming a fist against the console. Sparks flew. "Okay, not helping." The planet loomed below, a jungle-covered sphere with a suspiciously welcoming glow. "Let's hope this place isn't crawling with toothy death monsters," Ethan said, gripping the controls. As he descended, the ship scraped against thick tree canopies, groaning like an old man with a bad back. Finally, the craft skidded to a halt, embedding itself halfway into the ground. Ethan stumbled out, coughing on acrid smoke. The jungle smelled earthy and foreign, with plants that seemed to lean toward him like curious voyeurs. "Great, the audience is already here," he quipped, slapping at a vine that tried to coil around his leg. Before he could catch his breath, a group of tall, silver-skinned aliens emerged from the foliage. Their shimmering robes and glowing eyes screamed, "Cult leader chic." Ethan raised his hands, palms out. "Hey, I come in peace, and mostly by accident." The tallest alien stepped forward, offering a bow that was equal parts elegant and condescending. "Welcome, traveler. I am Virik, leader of the ZYLLVEC. You are fortunate to have crashed on our sacred lands."
"Yeah."
"Fortunate wasn't the first word that came to mind," Ethan said, eyeing their ornate staffs, which looked more weapon than ceremonial. Virik smiled. "We are a generous people. Come, let us show you our great achievements. You may find them enlightening." Ethan followed them into their village, a gleaming mix of advanced tech and tribal aesthetics. Towering structures pulsed with a strange energy, but his attention snagged on a group of human women, clearly out of place, working alongside the ZYLLVEC. One of the women, a tall brunette with a military stance, noticed his confusion. She strode over, arms crossed. "You lost, space cowboy?" "Depends," Ethan said, scanning her for weapons. "You the welcome committee or the you stay off my lawn type?" "Name's Cassie," she said, ignoring his quip. "And you've just landed in a pile of galactic-grade crap. Those glowing jerks call it a cultural exchange, but it's more like an abduction with a fancy bow on top." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Cultural exchange? Like student swaps? You visit Earth, we visit." Cassie cut him off with a dry laugh. "Not quite. They're using us to power their tech through bonding rituals. Think batteries, but way more invasive." Ethan blinked. "Bonding? Like, team-building exercises?" "Sure," Cassie deadpanned. "If team-building involves being hooked up to machines while they synchronize with your biology." Ethan grimaced. "That sounds violating." "Understatement of the century," she replied. "Most of us are playing along until we can figure out how to disable their core and get out of here." Virik approached, his smile as plastic as a cheap toy. "I see you've met one of our esteemed contributors. Their resilience is admirable, is it not?" Ethan forced a grin.
"Yeah."
"Totally admirable. By the way, how exactly do these rituals work?" Virik's eyes gleamed. "Our synchronization rituals are a blend of ancient tradition and advanced technology. They require trust and connection." Ethan's smile wavered. "Connection, huh? Sounds intimate." "Very," Virik said, oblivious to the undertone. Cassie rolled her eyes behind him, mouthing, "Help us, Captain Obvious." As Virik led Ethan away, Cassie muttered under her breath, "He better not screw this up." Ethan soon found himself inside a sleek but eerie chamber, watching the ZYLLVEC demonstrate their rituals. Pulsing machines surrounded a central platform, where another human woman lay, her face strained. Virik narrated with enthusiasm. "You see, the energy transfer sustains our society, ensuring prosperity and stability." Ethan fought to keep his expression neutral. "So, these transfers, they're voluntary, right?" Virik tilted his head. "We believe in symbiosis. Both parties gain something valuable." Ethan clenched his jaw, his gut telling him the ZYLLVEC's version of consent was sketchier than a used ship dealer's warranty. Later, Cassie cornered him near the outskirts of the village. You see what we're dealing with now?
Yeah.
Ethan said. And I'm guessing my ship's too busted to just fly you all out of here. Bingo. He sighed. Looks like I'm in for some hero crap. Cassie smirked. Don't strain yourself, Captain Savior. Just try not to get us all killed. Ethan leaned against a tree, processing Cassie's revelations while she paced in front of him, her movements sharp and deliberate. We've been planning to disable their core for months, she said, her tone a mix of frustration and determination. Then you show up, and suddenly Vierick thinks he can use you as their new guinea pig. Ethan frowned. Wait, they want to sync with me? Cassie stopped, raising an eyebrow. Of course. You're human, and they're desperate. Trust me, you're the hottest commodity they've seen in a while, and I don't mean that as a compliment. He shuddered. Well, that's deeply unsettling. Any chance I can just nope my way out of this? Not unless you want to end up as their next power core, she shot back. Ethan exhaled loudly. Fine. What's your plan? Cassie motioned for him to follow as she led him toward a concealed bunker camouflaged with jungle foliage. Inside, the other human women were busy tinkering with stolen ZYLLVEC components, their faces grim but focused. This is the team, Cassie said, gesturing around. We've been collecting parts to sabotage the core. Problem is, we're missing a key component, the regulator. Without it, we can't control the overload, and the whole thing could blow up in our faces. Literally. Ethan folded his arms. So you're saying this is where I come in? You're small time, but you've got a knack for getting into places you shouldn't, Cassie said. The regulator is in their central compound, heavily guarded. You distract them, we grab it. Ethan smirked. Distraction's my middle name. I was thinking liability, but sure, she retorted, earning chuckles from the women nearby. The next morning, Ethan strolled into the village center with a ridiculous swagger, drawing immediate attention. Good news, fellas, he called out. I've decided to fully embrace this whole cultural exchange thing. Where do I sign up for one of those fancy bonding rituals? The ZYLLVEC froze, clearly unprepared for his sudden enthusiasm. Vierick appeared, his expression a mix of suspicion and delight. A most unexpected change of heart, he said, his smile tight. Come. We shall prepare you for synchronization. Behind the scenes, Cassie and her team used the commotion to sneak into the compound. Ethan, meanwhile, kept the ZYLLVEC occupied with an over-the-top performance, acting awestruck by their technology and traditions. Wow, this is so advanced, he said, examining a console with exaggerated wonder. You must have the most impressive synchronization stats in the galaxy. Vierick puffed up with pride. Indeed. Our methods are unparalleled. And these rituals, Ethan continued, gesturing vaguely. Do they require any special skills? Vierick's glow intensified. Only the willingness to connect on the deepest level. Ethan resisted the urge to gag. Right, deep connection. Got it. As he babbled, Cassie and her team located the regulator, a cylindrical device pulsing with light. Got it, one of the women whispered, carefully detaching it from its housing. But just as they started to retreat, an alarm blared. Ethan froze, his fake grin faltering. That wasn't me, was it? Vierick's smile vanished. Intruders. Cassie cursed under her breath. Time to improvise, she said, signaling her team to split up. Ethan, caught in the middle, decided to lean into his role. I knew it, he shouted, pointing dramatically. Saboteurs. Probably jealous of your amazing culture. Don't worry, I'll help you stop them. The ZYLLVEC hesitated, confused by his sudden allegiance. Cassie used the distraction to slip past their guards, the regulator clutched tightly in her hands. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself escorted into a preparation chamber. His stomach churned as Vierick described the synchronization process in excruciating detail. First, we align your biofrequency. Then comes the infusion of neural pathways. That's super fascinating, Ethan said, stalling for time. But what if I'm allergic to neural infusions? Virek's glowing eyes narrowed. Impossible. All humans are compatible. Lucky us, Ethan muttered under his breath. Cassie's voice crackled in his earpiece, barely audible over the ZYLLVX chatter. We're out. Meet us at the rendezvous point. And try not to die. Ethan cleared his throat. Actually, Virek, I've just remembered, I left my favorite boots in my ship. Can't sink without them. It's a whole ritual thing. Be right back. Without waiting for a response, he bolted, dodging ZYLLVX guards as alarms blared around him. Cassie and her team were waiting near the jungle's edge, their stolen regulator glowing faintly. Took you long enough, Cassie said, tossing him a weapon.
Yeah.
Well, I like to keep things exciting, Ethan replied, his grin returning despite the chaos. As they fled into the jungle, the ZYLLVX hot on their heels, Ethan couldn't help but laugh. You know, for a cultural exchange, this is way more hands-on than I expected. Cassie rolled her eyes. Keep running, Captain Savior. The jungle was alive with chaos. Ethan sprinted alongside Cassie and the other women, his lungs burning as branches whipped at his face. Next time someone says easy in and out, remind me to run the other way, he shouted, narrowly dodging a blast from the pursuing ZYLLVX guards. Cassie didn't even glance back. You volunteered, remember? Now move your ass, or I'll leave you behind. Ethan huffed but kept pace, clutching the makeshift blaster Cassie had tossed him. The group skidded to a halt near a rocky outcrop, panting as they ducked out of sight. Cassie glanced at the regulator, still glowing faintly in her hands. This thing's more fragile than it looks, she said, her voice low. If it gets damaged, our entire plan's toast. Ethan peeked over the rocks, watching the ZYLLVX regroup. No pressure or anything, he muttered. One of the women, a petite engineer named Lana, adjusted her glasses and examined the regulator. We need to get this back to the bunker ASAP. I can rig it to overload their core, but it's going to take some time. Ethan groaned. Great. How much time are we talking? Because those guys don't look like they're giving us a breather. Cassie ignored his complaining and pulled out a crude map etched into a piece of bark. We can take the river trail. It's longer but harder to track. Harder for them or harder for us? Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. Do you ever stop whining? Cassie snapped. Only when I'm dead, which might be soon at this rate, Ethan shot back. Lana interrupted their bickering. We don't have a choice. The river trail's our best shot. The group set off again, moving as quickly as the uneven terrain allowed. The jungle's oppressive humidity weighed on them, and Ethan's shirt clung to him like a second skin. So, Captain Savior, Cassie said, her tone dripping with sarcasm, what's your grand plan once we blow the core? Fly us out of here in your busted ship? Hey, my ship might be a little rough around the edges, but it's reliable, Ethan said defensively. Wasn't it on fire when you crashed? Details, Ethan muttered. The river came into view, its rushing water providing a momentary sense of relief. But as they waded into the shallows, Ethan's boot snagged on something. He looked down and froze. Guys, he said, his voice shaky. Cassie turned, her patience visibly wearing thin. What now? Ethan pointed to the water. A pair of glowing eyes stared back at them, just beneath the surface. Before anyone could react, a massive reptilian creature burst from the river, its jaws snapping inches from Ethan's face. He stumbled backward, firing wildly. Really? Alien gators, he shouted, scrambling to his feet. Cassie and the others opened fire, their shots forcing the creature to retreat, but not before it let out an ear-splitting roar that echoed through the jungle. Well, so much for sneaky, Cassie said, reloading her weapon. Don't look at me, Ethan said. It was self-defense. The sound of approaching Zylvek grew louder, their voices echoing through the trees. Cassie cursed under her breath. We've got to move. Now. The group pushed forward, the river trail growing steeper and more treacherous. Ethan slipped several times, earning glares from Cassie. Seriously, how are you still alive? She asked, exasperated. Pure charm and dumb luck, Ethan replied, grinning despite himself. Finally, they reached a clearing where the jungle gave way to a series of jagged cliffs. Below, the bunker was barely visible, hidden among the rocks. We're almost there, Cassie said, her voice tense. Almost there turned out to be a death-defying climb down a sheer rock face. Ethan's palms were slick with sweat as he clung to the cliff, every muscle in his body screaming in protest. Remind me to add alien mountaineering to my resume, he grumbled, inching downward. Cassie smirked. If we live through this, you can call yourself whatever you want. By the time they reached the bunker, the group was exhausted but determined. Lana immediately got to work, connecting the regulator to a tangle of wires and machinery. This is it, she said, her hand steady despite the pressure. Once I overload the core, it'll shut down their entire power grid. But we'll need to move fast, there's no telling how they'll react. Ethan leaned against the wall, catching his breath. Fast is my middle name. Cassie rolled her eyes. Pretty sure it's a liability. The sound of approaching footsteps snapped them back to reality. The Zylvek had found them. Ethan raised his blaster, his usual bravado replaced with grim determination. Guess it's showtime. Cassie nodded, her expression fierce. Let's make it count. The Zylvek stormed the clearing, their glowing forms casting eerie light across the rocky terrain. Ethan fired a few warning shots, but their shields absorbed the blasts effortlessly. Okay, bad news, he muttered. They're not big on negotiating. Cassie adjusted her weapon, her jaw set. We don't need negotiation. We need time. Lana, how much longer? Lana's fingers flew across the regulator's controls. 2 minutes, maybe less. Make it 1, Cassie snapped, aiming and firing at an advancing guard. Ethan ducked behind cover, his heart pounding. So, what's plan B if this doesn't work? Cassie didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed a grenade-like device from her belt and tossed it into the fray. The explosion sent a shockwave through the area, forcing the Zylvek to retreat momentarily. Ethan peeked out from his hiding spot, his ears ringing. I'm gonna take that as a plan B is boom. Cassie's glare could have melted steel. Less talking, more shooting. The Zylvek regrouped quickly, their leader, Virek, stepping forward. His voice boomed over the chaos. Surrender now, and we will grant you mercy. Continue to resist, and you'll face annihilation. Ethan smirked, calling out from behind his cover. Define a mercy. Is it the kind where you turn us into living batteries? Because I'm gonna pass on that. Virek's glowing eyes narrowed. Your insolence will be your undoing, human. Cassie leaned toward Ethan. Stop taunting him. What? It's called psychological warfare. Ethan argued, firing off another shot. More like psychological annoyance, Cassie muttered, taking down another guard. Lana suddenly shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. It's ready. The regulator hummed with energy, the lights on its surface pulsing rapidly. Cassie grabbed it, shouting orders to the group. Fall back to the secondary position. I'll plant this thing in the core and meet you there. Ethan grabbed her arm. You're not going alone. Her eyes blazed with determination. Someone has to. You wouldn't make it 10 feet in there. Ethan hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Fine. But if you die, I'm taking it personally. Noted, she said with a faint smirk before disappearing into the jungle. The remaining women covered her retreat, laying down suppressive fire. Ethan stayed close to Lana, his blaster overheating from constant use. So, secondary position, where is that exactly? Through the ridge, Lana said, pointing to a narrow path. It's a fallback point with better cover. Better cover sounds good, Ethan said, ducking as a blast narrowly missed his head. They sprinted toward the ridge, the Zylvek hot on their heels. Ethan fired over his shoulder, his aim wild but effective enough to slow their pursuers. Any chance these guys have an off switch? Not unless you count blowing up their core, Lana said, her voice tight. Great. Love a good long shot, Ethan muttered. The fallback point was a small cave, barely large enough to fit the group. Ethan collapsed against the wall, his chest heaving. Okay, now what? We wait, Lana said, checking her makeshift communicator. Cassie will signal when she's planted the regulator. Ethan frowned. And if she doesn't? Lana didn't answer. The silence stretched as they listened to the distant sounds of the Zylvek combing the area. Ethan's mind raced, every worst-case scenario flashing before him. Finally, the communicator crackled to life. Regulator is in place, Cassie's voice came through, strained but steady. Get ready for fireworks. Lana grinned, immediately activating the remote trigger. The cave shook as a massive explosion rocked the jungle, the sound deafening. Ethan peeked outside, watching as the Zylvek's glowing forms flickered and dimmed. Their shields failed, and their weapons powered down. Well, that's one way to pull the plug, he said, grinning. Cassie appeared moments later, covered in dirt but very much alive. Cores down. Let's move before they regroup. The group wasted no time, racing toward the edge of the jungle where Ethan's ship was hidden. The vessel looked even worse than Ethan remembered, its hull scorched and dented. This is our escape plan? Cassie asked, skeptical. Hey, she's got character, Ethan said, punching the access code. The ramp lowered with a groan, and the group piled in. Ethan sprinted to the cockpit, frantically flipping switches. The ship sputtered but eventually roared to life. Buckle up, he shouted as the engines fired, lifting them off the ground. The Zylvek reappeared, their forces diminished but still determined. They fired wildly at the departing ship, but the blasts bounced harmlessly off the hull. Ethan smirked, gripping the controls. See? Reliable. Cassie sat beside him, glaring. Just get us out of here, Captain Savior. With pleasure, he said, guiding the ship into the atmosphere. As they broke free of the planet's gravity, Ethan leaned back in his seat, exhausted but exhilarated. So, where to next? Cassie gave him a rare smile. Anywhere but here. Ethan grinned. I can work with that. The ship vanished into the stars, leaving the jungle planet, and the Zylvek, far behind.